Alright, good evening folks, it's Enforcer Matt and welcome back to another short war video. And today we have massive news coming out of Moscow, some more details about that terrorist attack that took place on Crocus City Hall yesterday, and we're learning some more details about the casualties as well as the damage caused from that incident. We're also learning that Putin has come out and made a public address to the Russian people blaming the attack on Ukraine. So they are already starting that false flag narrative, and also we're seeing here that there is a major issue happening at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There seems to be a problem with the connection to the main lines, which is causing potentially a blackout. We're also learning some more news about continued fighting in Belgrade, and today is an absolutely news-packed day, and there is a lot to cover. So let's go ahead and jump right into our first article of the day, which goes to the Intel Crab. And in this post, we can see that after 10 plus hours of intense firefighting, the Crocus City Hall in North Moscow appears to be a total loss, and there's heavy damage to the roof along with several areas of smoke and fire damage. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video right here and see what kind of damage we have. And as you can see there's the roof of the concert hall itself. It is completely collapsed and it is now on the ground. So quite extensive damage indeed, and that is the area actually where the shooting took place, and most of the casualties actually occurred was right there in that area where the roof has actually collapsed. So quite indeed big damage there, and the concert hall is a total loss. So moving on to our next article here, we actually have one from BNO News, and this is a very short recap of all the facts we know about the attack itself. We can see that there were at least 4 heavily armed gunmen that opened fire at the city concert hall in Moscow. The rock band Picnic was due to perform there at the time of the shooting, and the building was actually caught on fire using a flamethrower that was apparently shot up at the ceiling or something like that of the building, causing it to catch on fire. And we can see here that at least 143 people are confirmed dead, and the death toll is expected to rise further, and 121 people have been hospitalized. And we know that 4 suspects were arrested after a police chase earlier this morning in the Bryansk region, and during the chase, the suspects fired at the police. And then once they were caught, 2 of them claimed that they were promised up to 1 million rubles or 10,000 USD each to carry out the attack. And they claimed that they were told where to attack through Telegram anonymously. And then we also saw that ISIS did claim responsibility for the attack, and we're also seeing that the Russian FSB is now claiming that attackers had contacts in Ukraine and were driving to the border when they were caught near Bryansk to try to flee back into Ukraine. So while some of these facts are very interesting, the bottom line is this is a massive terrorist attack. It's very big indeed, and there's a lot more to the story than we had known previously, and it's just now coming out. So let's go ahead and move into our next article here, which goes to BNO News. And we can see the death toll has actually risen to 150 people at least killed in the attack, according to the Channel 112 News. And that is quite a very big death toll indeed. That is a lot of innocent civilians that were killed. And even though Russia does carry out attacks on civilians, it is very unfortunate to see that 150 people, even if they were Russian civilians, have been killed in this, because that is, of course, innocent life, and they were basically slaughtered at the hands of these gunmen. And moving on to our next story here, this is actually a post from us on Twitter, @It'sTheEnforcer, and we can see that Russia has begun blaming Ukraine for the Crocus Hall terrorist attack in Moscow, and Putin vows severe retribution, and Russian leaders are setting the stage for something drastic, and now Peskov has begun calling the special military operation a full-blown war. So, like we had suspected, Russia is using this opportunity, whether or not it was actually a false flag or not. They're going to try to place the blame on Ukraine to cause an escalation in the war. And if you've been following Russia for some time, you'll know this is no surprise, because this is the Russian playbook, word for word. This is what they do. They place blame on people when they really can't find a suspect or someone to really blame. And in this case, I think Russia actually may want to put blame on Ukraine, so that way they can try to cause a bigger, probably a mobilization actually, in Russia to fight the war in Ukraine. But with that, we're moving on to our next article here, which goes to Next on Twitter, and we can see that Putin is accusing Ukraine specifically of preparing an escape route for the terrorists. And more specifically, Putin says that all 4 direct performers of the terrorist attack at the Crocus City Hall had been found. They tried to escape, moving towards Ukraine, where according to preliminary data, a window for them to cross had been prepared. And obviously, take that with a huge grain of salt. That is Putin speaking, and Putin is a known liar. So, the fact that he's saying these guys are simply moving toward Ukraine says nothing to me. And we don't even know if that's actually true. That could be completely made up. and we're just going to simply wait and see when the further details come out. But with that, we're moving on to our next article here, which goes to FITUX News. And the Kremlin is already telling Russia's pro-government media to emphasize possible traces of Ukrainian involvement when reporting on the Moscow terrorist attack, said a state media employee and source in pro-Kremlin media, according to Meduza. And this is not surprising, and we're actually seeing this in action already, which we're about to get to in our next post, that the pro-government media in Russia is already hyping up the fact that Ukraine was allegedly, quote unquote, according to Putin, involved in this attack. And we know already that Ukraine has disavowed any involvement in it, and there is no evidence whatsoever that Ukraine even had an inkling of involvement in this attack. And that's not going to prevent Russia from actually blaming it on Ukraine, and we can see that they're doing that right now. So let's go ahead and move right into our next post of the day, which goes to Nexta itself. And you might recognize this face right here. This is the Russian propagandist Simonian, who is now trying to convince everyone on Russian state TV, on RT, that the Ukraine was involved in the terrorist attack in the Moscow region. And the quote says, "So here it goes, it's not ISIS, it's Ukrainians." And the fact that even yesterday, even before the arrest, before the faces and names of the perpetrators, Western security services began to convince the population that this is ISIS, and that's what set fire to this thief. So already they're starting the narrative that this was some kind of CIA cover-up for Ukraine to conduct this terrorist attack. And that is atypical Russian propaganda, and they're already starting it. So let's go ahead and move right into our next article here. And we can see that not only is the media saying that, but also the Russian government is saying it as well. And it says here, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova says, through the hands of the West, Ukraine has been turning into a center for the spread of terrorism for over 10 years, and a terrorist tried to flee there after the attack, according to TASS. This is just complete BS all the way around. I can't even believe this is something being said by Russia, because Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine was minding its own business and had nothing to do with Russia except for the skirmishes on the border that they were having, and they were minding their own business. But Russia came and invaded Ukraine, and now Russia wants to call Ukraine the terrorists. Absolutely insanity going on with this right here. But with that, we're moving on to our next article, which goes to Visegrad 24. And in this one, we can see that Putin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, speaking just hours before the terror attack itself, was calling the quote-unquote special military operation in Ukraine, switching the terminology to now calling it a war for Russia. And that was before the terror attack occurred. And then after that terror attack happened, now we see the Russian government trying to label the whole situation in Ukraine as a war instead of calling it a special military operation, which indicates to me that a major escalation is probably coming in the form of a mobilization inside of Russia. And this terror attack may be a perfect pretext for Russia to pull that off without any reaction from the public. Moving on to our next post here, we have one from FITUX News once again, and we're learning from the state media TASS in Russia that Putin has just spoken with the Belarusian leader Lukashenko, and both have confirmed their readiness to cooperate in the fight against terrorism. And this is basically code for Belarus is on board with Russia with whatever escalation they're wanting to pull off. So we're seeing some support from Putin's cronies and buddies here that they are willing to get involved as well, which could spark something even larger. Once again, we're keeping a sharp eye on that. But now moving on to our next post here, this is a little bit of a funny piece of information here about the special forces that took an hour to show up to the Crocus Hall terror attack. And we're learning the special forces building is actually located directly opposite of the Crocus on the other side of the road where the terrorist attack took place. And at the same time, the terrorists were reportedly able to run away while Russian special forces drove to the place of tragedy, which was the city hall, for more than an hour. So there has been no explanation for why it took Russian special forces an hour to get there, even though their headquarters that they're building is literally right across the street. That makes no sense whatsoever. That's a very fishy piece of news right there. And we're also sort of confused by the fact that when the terrorists went into the building, they really took no efforts to hide their identity. And also, typically during a terror attack of this sort, the terrorists will off themselves after the attack is over. And that also did not happen, and they tried to flee from the area and conveniently got caught later by Russian FSB. So the entire situation does have some red flags about it as to being potentially a setup or a false flag attack. But once again, there's not enough evidence right now to say that for certain, but certainly the evidence is stacking up to support that theory. But with that, moving on to our next article here, we actually have one from FITUX News, and we can see that according to one of the terrorists that were captured by Russia, he became a terrorist and killed that many people for approximately $5,400. And if this guy actually is one of the terrorists, then that is absolutely insane to hear that he would go conduct a terrorist attack for $5,000, especially one of this magnitude and atrocity. But then again, this is the Russians taking this. We don't know if this is actually the terrorist or not. It could be an innocent man that Russia picked up to try to frame him as a terrorist. At this point, you can't put any stock into anything Russia's putting out because they're such liars. You're not really sure what's truth and what's fake. So that is the official story itself. But like I said, take it with a grain of salt. And moving on here to our next article, we actually have one from Nexta, and we're going to switch back to our Ukraine news here for just a second because we're getting some very disturbing news that the nuclear power plant in Ukraine in the Zaporizhia region is now on the verge of a blackout for the second time in a day. And the details are as follows. It says for the second time in 24 hours, the Zaporizhia nuclear plant was left with only one power line, and last night the 330 kilovolt power line was de-energized due to shelling in the area, resulting in the shutdown of an additional power supply circuit of the plant. And obviously this is a big story in and of itself because the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has been mismanaged terribly by the Russians, and they've obviously been storing military equipment right inside the reactor hall, as well as placing explosives around it. And now we're learning that because of the shelling in the area, which we don't know if it's because of the Russians or the Ukrainians at this point, the place had been disconnected from the power line. So that could cause a very bad situation, to say the least, at the plant. But unfortunately, that's all the information we have at the moment. But that's a big story that we're following very closely because that could lead to some very disastrous results if it is completely disconnected from the grid. But with that, we're moving on to our next article here, which goes to Anton Gerashenko. And we're getting some footage of the Dnipro Dam after that Russian missile strike that took place the other day. And we're learning here the plant's supports, crane beams, and equipment are damaged, but there's no threat of a dam breach at the moment. So now that the dam is reopened, let's take a look at this video right here and see exactly what the damage actually looks like. And you can see here, there are these civilians driving over the dam, as we can see in the video. And there is the big hole in the dam itself. And as of right now, there is no risk of collapse according to the Ukrainian government, but as you can see, the control tower was right here and it was knocked out, and also there is a massive section of concrete missing there from the top of the dam. But it looks like Ukraine has this under control, so I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see that they have traffic already back on the bridge that quickly. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into our next article, which goes to the Ukraine front line. And we can see that the shelling in Belgorod has increased for the 10th day in a row. So let's go ahead and take a look at the video and see what we have. And you can actually see the shelling right here in the distance. This is Belgorod, by the way. And it sounds quite heavy. And there is a ton of shelling going on right over there, and that is the Freedom of Russia Legion, along with ex-Wagner soldiers, attacking the city of Belgorod, once again for the 10th day in a row, which indicates that they aren't going anywhere, and that Russia is going to keep being invaded by these rebels for some time to come. But with that, we have our last article of the day, which goes to the Ukraine front line as well, and we're learning that last night not only was one oil refinery hit inside of Russia, but there was also a second one hit in the Samara region, which is the same region as the first attack, by drones from Ukraine last night. So let's take a look at the photo here, and we can see out in the distance there is a massive fire at that oil refinery, the second one in the Samara region, and we actually have some video evidence here to watch. So let's take a look and see what we have. And you can see there's the fire right in the middle of the refinery. Let's try to get this video a little bit larger here, and there you can see it. It is right there in the middle, and it's obviously a dead-on drone hit by Ukraine. And Ukraine's gotten even more accurate with these drone strikes. And also, this is a very long-range drone strike as well. This was one of the longest ones Ukraine has ever conducted. And they hit smack dab right in the middle of that oil refinery and took it out even from that kind of distance. So with that, that is actually our last piece of news for the day. And today has been an absolute whopper of a news day. And there's going to be a ton of news to cover tonight on our nightly war news stream at 10 p.m. Eastern. So be sure to join us then as well. And also, I hope you found the video informative today. And if you have, please press that like button and subscribe to the channel as well, because that greatly helps us get the news out there. And also, if you want to support our operation financially to help keep us running, you can do so on our Patreon page. The link is in the description below, and you can sign up over there and help our operation to keep on rolling. So with that, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all tonight. And bye-bye for now.